In an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of Loudville, no one had lived for many years. The windows had long been shattered, the walls were covered in moss, and the garden had turned into an overgrown, dense forest. The local residents avoided this place, claiming that the mansion was cursed and that those who dared to approach it never returned the same. The legend said that the house once belonged to a wealthy and influential family who had mysteriously disappeared, leaving their estate to the mercy of time and the elements. But something about this place had always attracted Mark. Since childhood, he had heard the frightening stories about the house, but unlike others, his heart burned with curiosity. He was always certain that behind every myth lay a grain of truth, and that perhaps it was his destiny to unravel the mystery of the cursed house. When he turned 25, he decided it was time to conduct his own investigation. Mark was an explorer by spirit and profession. He studied archaeology and mysticism and was often drawn to unexplained phenomena, willing to take risks for the sake of it. His apartment was filled with books on ancient religions, occultism, and history. Preparing everything he needed for his expedition, he set off, determined to uncover the secrets of the mansion. His path led through the dense forest surrounding Loudville. The road leading to the mansion had long been overgrown with grass and bushes, but Mark walked confidently, armed with an old map he had found in one of the books. Upon reaching the house, he stopped for a moment, examining it. The house looked majestic despite years of neglect. Tall towers and carved decorations on the facade hinted at its former luxury, and the massive door with ornate iron hinges still bore traces of its previous grandeur. Mark slowly approached the door, which by some strange coincidence was slightly ajar. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional gusts of wind that found their way through the cracked window panes. He stepped inside and found himself in a vast hall with marble columns and an old staircase leading to the second floor. From floor to ceiling, the walls were lined with portraits of people in antique clothing, their eyes seeming to follow his every move. As Mark explored the house, he noticed many small details that indicated that life had once thrived here. In the corner of the hall stood an old grand piano, on which melodies may have once been played, echoing throughout the house. Nearby was a fireplace that had long ceased to burn. Mark opened one of the doors and found himself in a library. The shelves were filled with books in various languages, many of which were dusty and untouched for decades. On an old oak table lay a diary that looked much newer than everything else. Mark picked it up, opened it to the first page, and began to read. It was the diary of the house's previous owner, a man named Victor Lawson. In his writings, Mark found mentions of how, in the days leading up to the family's disappearance, strange things began happening in the house. Lawson wrote about shadows flickering in the corners of rooms, whispers heard in the silence, and mirrors that reflected not his image, but something far more sinister. The further Mark read, the more he realized that the Lawson family's story was connected to something much older and more dangerous than just a family curse. The diary mentioned a mysterious book that had been passed down to Victor by his ancestors, which he claimed contained some ancient knowledge capable of altering reality. Victor described how each day his life became increasingly filled with fear and madness, as if something from the book was trying to escape into our world. On the last pages of the diary, Victor wrote that he was planning to perform a ritual that was supposed to seal the evil forever, but something went wrong. The final entry was cut off mid-sentence, and there were no further mentions of the Lawson family. Mark realized that the answer to his questions lay in this mysterious book. The next few days he dedicated to exploring the house, trying to find the book. He examined every room, rummaged through every cupboard and drawer, but to no avail. However, he did not give up, feeling that the solution was close. Finally, in one of the hidden rooms in the attic, he came across an old chest sealed with a lock bearing unknown symbols. Opening it, Mark found what he had been searching for, a thick book in a black binding, covered in ancient writings. As soon as Mark touched the book, strange things began to happen in the house. The light in the room started to dim, and the air became heavy and cold. He felt the house coming to life, and something ancient and dangerous awakening. Ignoring the growing sense of unease, Mark began to read the book. The pages were filled with texts in an ancient language that he could not decipher, but the more he read, the more his consciousness slipped into a strange trance. Suddenly, Mark heard a voice. He wasn't sure where it was coming from the book or from deep within his own mind. The voice was quiet, whispering, but Mark understood what it wanted from him. The voice offered him knowledge, power, and control, but in exchange, it demanded one thing: to be freed. Realizing he was on the brink, Mark tried to stop, but the book had already completely taken over his will. He could no longer control his actions. His hands continued to turn the pages, and the voice grew louder, more insistent. When Mark realized he had unleashed ancient evil, it was already too late. The house began to change, the walls seemed to come alive, and the shadows he had only seen out of the corner of his eye now surrounded him, laughing and whispering in an unknown language. The voice in his head laughed, relishing his fear and despair. Mark tried to escape, but the house wouldn't let him go. He wandered the corridors, which now seemed endless, and every time he thought he had found an exit, he would find himself back in the very hall where his journey had begun. He realized that he had become a part of this house, just like its previous inhabitants. Years passed, and the people of Loudville no longer heard about Mark. He disappeared just like everyone who had tried before him to unravel the mansion's mystery. The house on the edge of town continued to stand, surrounded by the forest, and no one dared to approach it. Only the occasional travelers, who accidentally wandered into these parts, would speak of strange lights flickering in the house's windows at night, and of laughter emanating from its depths. The legend of the Lawson house turned into another scary story told in local bars, but no one knew what really happened to Mark and what kind of force now resided in that place. The house had become a prison for all who had tried to uncover its secrets, and those who once entered its doors never emerged again.